So welcome to this series on conducting a successful scoping review project. Today's session will focus on identifying sources of evidence. It's an important part of the process, obviously. It's at the base of what your review will end up looking. So if you spend a lot of time preparing your searches and running them and successfully gathering the evidence, then you can feel more confident about the conclusions that you'll draw based on this evidence that you'll be finding through the different sources. I particularly like this statement, and if you think of a scoping review as a research methodology, which it is, then your review itself will only be as good as your search strategy. And the search strategy is the data collection tool in the context of any review project. If you compare this to a qualitative research project where your interview protocol is your collection instrument, if you compare this to a quantitative study where you might run a survey, you're going to validate that survey before running it, and all the data that's gathered through the survey is at the base of the analysis that you will do and the conclusions that you will draw. So in the context of a review project, your search strategy is your data collection instrument. And so the more time you spend preparing your search, the more confident you will be that you'll be gathering all the evidence to help answer the review question itself. So today's video will outline a few different steps to take in identifying that evidence base. First off, you might have remembered from the first video that I mentioned that collaborating with your librarian is key, and we'll talk about how librarians can assist in the process of identifying sources. Secondly, we'll look at determining your key concepts from your review question. And in addition to that, we'll look at how you can search for existing strategies that have been published in other reviews, but also looking to identify key relevant articles that can help inform the strategy that you'll develop. We'll talk about how to go about identifying databases to search. We'll talk obviously a lot about preparing an exhaustive search strategy to, as I said earlier, gather as much evidence as you can to help answer your review question. And then finally, we'll talk a bit about complementary searching and how that's an important part of the process that a lot of researchers or review teams will skip in the process of doing a systematic or scoping review, but how important that is and how it can assist in finding literature that might not have been published through traditional channels. So the first step in all of this is understanding where the librarian fits into the process. And I'm not just making this up because I'm a librarian myself, but most methodological guidance recommends that librarians be part of review teams. We bring expertise that's different than subject matter experts. We're not subject matter experts, but we know a lot about information research. And we know a lot about databases, how to use them, how to identify and select them. And we also know a lot about search operators and search syntax. And we'll look at examples today, and the search strategies that are developed in the context of systematic reviews go beyond what you might traditionally use just to find articles using databases or even using Google Scholar. So that added value that we bring to the search process can really help enhance the quality of the results you're going to find. We also have a thorough knowledge of review methodologies. We know of different types of reviews, so we can guide review teams to select the proper approach if they're thinking that they want to do a systematic review, but it might be better suited, their question might be better suited for a scoping review. In that case, we'll direct teams in the right direction as well. And if we don't know a lot about the methodologies of a certain type of review, we know where to get information on those methodological guidance. And so that we can help teams sort of navigate this this realm of knowledge synthesis projects or types of reviews that exist. We also have a capacity to organize things. You might have think of a stereotype of librarians organizing content. Well, that's part of what we do. We organize literature, obviously, but we also have an attention to detail that can help in the review process to make sure that all the steps are taken into account. We also are realistic in terms of the time involved in producing a quality review. As I alluded to in the first video, it's not something that happens over a weekend or over a couple weeks. It's really sometimes a month-long, more than several months-long project that can even evolve over the course of a full year. So being able to sort of plot out the time required to complete certain steps can help review teams understand the magnitude of creating a scoping review. And finally, we can provide also some guidance through training and workshops on different aspects of scoping review methods. Obviously, we talked about formulating a proper research question in the context of a scoping review in the first video, and today we'll come back to that framework that I presented, the PCC approach, so the population, the concept, and the context. And one thing to remember when you're preparing your search strategy is to identify or pull out those key concepts and which ones will you use in your search strategy. If we use a simple example of the impact of class size on academic achievement, that's a very simplistic scoping review question, but if we pull that out, the key concepts of that question relate to the class size as the intervention potentially, and then also the outcome, which in this case would be the academic achievement. So we want to find out if class size matters when it comes to student success. And so keeping that in mind and pulling out the key concepts is one of the first steps in preparing a search that will help identify the evidence that comes after. Another step that you can take that can help in this process is identifying existing strategies and also relevant articles. And by relevant articles, I mean the articles that you know at the beginning. You might have 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 key articles that you know probably will meet the inclusion criteria for your review. And those articles can help inform the search strategy that you develop. I'll come back to that point in a few seconds. Finding previous strategies can help on multiple levels. In the first video, I mentioned the importance of looking to see if your review topic has been covered in a recently published review. If that's the case, you might not want to redo that review because it's already been done. But it also can help you find previously published reviews that might be a little older that you want to improve on or update. But more importantly, finding reviews is an important step to help find inspiration or to inform the search strategy that you'll develop. What I usually do when I'm preparing a search strategy is I will look to see, first of all, is there one that exists on the exact same question? So in our example, if I look for class size reviews and that focus also on academic achievement, if I see one that's recent, I might recommend that the team tweak their topic or consider another angle to it. But if I don't find one, I might search for reviews on class sizes to see how they formulated that concept in the shape of a search strategy. I'll then do one on academic achievement and search for reviews on academic achievement and do the same thing. And so what I look for in those instances are which databases that they use, which keywords and which subject headings that they use for those concepts. Did they use any filters to limit their results as well? I'm also looking at the search syntax to see which fields they search or which approaches they used in the different databases that they selected. So finding these examples can be tricky. There are some places where you can look. If the topic has anything to do with health or medicine, the Cochrane Library is really your go-to. This is sort of the gold standard in how systematic reviews are reported. And oftentimes, as an appendix, you'll find the full search strategies for all the databases. And so that's a great place to start. Obviously, if your topic touches in fields other than health and medicine, it's harder to find, but the Campbell Systematic Reviews is a journal that publishes reviews in the social sciences, education, crime and law, social justice, the environment as well. So there's quite a range of material covered by that particular journal. And that one also has a high standard for reporting, and all these search strategies will be included as an appendix. So again, those are great places to start. You might not always find what you need in those two tools. You can also turn to Prospero, which we talked about in the first video, as a place to make available protocols, again, more in the health sciences field. If all else fails, I usually just turn to Google Scholar, to be quite honest, and I'll search in Google Scholar to find examples of search strategies that might be published in specific reviews. The problem with results in most journals is that, or with reviews published by most journals, is that not all of them will be as transparent as Cochrane and Campbell in terms of providing you with a full search strategy. So just be aware that you might do a lot more digging around sometimes, and you'll have to look at maybe 10 or 12 reviews before you find something that actually is helpful. So here's an example of a Google Scholar search where I searched for the concept of class size or class sizes. Those expressions searched in the title on Google Scholar, and I also searched in the title for the word review. So this is just a screenshot of the first three results that appear. You'll notice two of them, the first and the third one, come from Campbell's Systematic, and it sort of trails off, but those are reviews published by Campbell's Systematic Reviews. And then there's another one that seems to be a Taylor and Francis publication. So you could look through these three or more on the list, there were 13 when I ran the search, and see if there's any examples of their search strategies. Now I did pull out one as an example, just to show you. This is from the most recent one on that list from 2023. Here's a segment of that article where they list the databases that they used. So this is a pretty thorough list here with ERIC, Academic Search Premier, a few other databases that team deemed relevant for their review. It's quite transparent too in the fact that they provided not only the name of the database, but also the interface that they searched and also the coverage dates of those different databases. So it gives you a good idea of which tools they used to gather their evidence when we're looking specifically for the databases that were searched. In addition, this article provides information about how their search strategy was developed. So they give a bit of a narrative here. We can see another acronym on the screen. It's the PICO model rather than the PCC model. So they identified a population and they covered that in lines 1 through 4 of their search that we can see in that bullet list. They also looked at using the intervention. And in this case, they also use a study type or methodology to screen out some references from the search itself. Now, they also provide as an appendix the search strategy. Here's an example of what was used in the ERIC database. So we can see here the order is sort of reversed as it's presented on in that paper, but search line 1, which is at the bottom of the list, search line 2, 3, those are the 3 lines that were used to focus on special needs students. That was one of their concepts related to their population. Then the group sizes are covered in lines 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we'll go into more detail about all of this syntax and all of these operators in a few slides. So in addition to looking at previously published reviews, you can also turn to search filter repositories. Those exist actually. So the librarians have put together these different repositories and have shared their search strategies with others to help inform, anyone who's interested in developing a strategy on a specific topic. So you can reuse existing filters. Some of them have been validated, so you can reuse them as is, or you can use them and adapt them. You can obviously cite all of the filters that you use, and you can report those in the methodology section as well, saying, for instance, that the following reviews based on class sizes were used to help inform the way the search strategy for this current review was developed. If you're interested in finding reviews, you can turn to different repositories, as I've mentioned. I've listed a few here on the screen. The ISSG one points out to a variety of different tools available online. University of Alberta, I included their libraries search filter on my list because they tend to have a lot of relevant Canadian filters as well. So those could be helpful in the context of searching for material that might be solely published or related to studies in Canada. Search Archive is another one that's gaining momentum where librarians will place their search strategies as well. And the last one, La Fédération des Milieux Documentaires, which is a French language resource, publishes both French language search strategies as well as English language ones too. So it's also good to include that one on the list. I also mentioned at just a few seconds ago, this importance of also finding relevant articles. And the relevant articles that you find can be helpful for a variety of reasons. At the beginning, you can use them, and they're sometimes referred to as seed articles. So you would use them to see which keywords are being used in the abstracts. How are they being indexed by the databases? Which subject headings have been assigned to these articles to categorize them in different databases? And so as you look at these 3, 4, 5 articles that you might have as seed articles, you can sort of pull out that information and put that into your search strategy as placeholders until you sort of iron out the strategy details as you go through the process. But you can also use these seed articles, and might sometimes see them labeled as validation articles, because once the search strategy has been finalized and you run it in a database, you can test to see if those articles appear in the results. If you have 3 articles, they're all indexed in the database that you're using, they should appear in your final set of results. So you use them to validate the effectiveness of your search and pulling the results that you're hoping it will. Another step too is to identify databases. Once you sort of do this work of looking at previous reviews, maybe jotting down the names of databases that other teams have used for their reviews, you can sort of start to think about which databases will be most relevant for your search. There are different kinds of databases. There are subject-specific ones which you'll want to use. So for instance, the example of class sizes, obviously you're going to want to use ERIC or even Education Source as key databases that index education literature. But you might also want to look at multidisciplinary databases that cover a broad range of fields. I often recommend that teams use at least 1, preferably 2 large databases, just to make sure that if it's not covered in subject-specific databases, it might be covered in these multidisciplinary tools. Academic Search Complete is one that we have that I often recommend. The Web of Science and Scopus are 2 others that are also heavily used in most reviews as well. In addition to the subject-specific ones, to the multidisciplinary ones, there's also other subject databases that might be helpful in fields that might be tangentially related. So for instance, in our example for class sizes, we might also want to include psychology databases, maybe sociology databases, or even general social sciences databases like the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences, just to name a few. So the databases often need to be selected in relation to the question and also to the inclusion criteria. I often get this question, how many databases should I search? I've seen reviews where 3 databases are searched, and that's sufficient because the topic is very narrow. There's a very limited set of results that would appear in only these 3 databases. So that's a good enough argument for that particular question. But I've also been on teams where we've searched 20 databases because the topic was multidisciplinary, and we wanted to see how that topic was discussed across different disciplines. So there's no right or wrong answer in terms of how many databases should be searched. Also, in terms of using databases, it's important to learn about the different characteristics and the different options in each database. So not only understanding search operators, but also search function, search syntax, and also limits. We tend to not use too many limits when we use searches for systematic reviews or scoping reviews because we don't want to inadvertently miss out on any articles that might be relevant. So it's more, the screening does more in terms of limiting and filtering out results rather than relying on the search strategy itself. Another important part of a search strategy is to include subject headings. So if you don't know what a subject heading is, essentially most subject-specific databases have a thesaurus, and most thesauri are organized as a hierarchy from broader terms to narrower terms. And these terms are used to index and categorize the content. So every time an article gets added to a database, it gets assigned a series of subject headings. And there's research that shows that systematic or scoping reviews that rely on subject headings or that include subject headings in their search strategies are more comprehensive and include more studies than those that don't and that just rely on keywords. So it's important to include both. And sometimes it's a bit tricky. So that's where your librarian can come in hand, can help in the process of identifying how best to use subject headings. Also, in terms of databases, it's a good idea if you want to create accounts on these different platforms to save your searches. And so it makes it easier if you need to rerun the search later on, you have that all saved in your account on these different platforms. So it's a nice idea to have that as a backup rather than having to relaunch the search by copying each and every line. Now that we've talked about databases and preparing by looking at previously published reviews, now comes the time of preparing an exhaustive search strategy. And this can be a bit of a challenge depending on where you are in the process of learning how to use different databases. So this isn't a course on the best way of searching for different articles, but I'm going to give you a crash course here in one slide of the different search operators. This might be a review, but it's good to know sort of how these search operators work in the context of a scoping review. So the and operator will combine both or more terms that you have in your search strategy. The more concepts you add with and, the fewer results you're going to get. So again, thinking of a review, you're trying to cast the net as broadly as possible to gather as much evidence as you can on your topic. So be aware of using too many ands, how that can impact the results you obtain. So here, if I were interested in articles on children and anxiety, using the and operator will find results where both terms appear. Now, the counterpart to this is the or operator, which is used usually with synonyms. So if you're interested in children, but also studies that might deal with adolescence, you can stick the or operator in between. Now, the more terms you add with or, the more results you're likely to get. So that's, again, a good idea to consider synonyms and related terms when you're preparing a search strategy using keywords. The third operator is the not, and this one is one that you probably want to avoid in the context of a scoping review, simply because you don't want to inadvertently exclude results from your set. If you say that I'm only interested in studies that deal with children and I don't want anything with adolescents. However, if an author in their abstract, they write a sentence that sounds like children as opposed to adolescents, well, in that context, we're not really dealing with an adolescent population in their sample, but they just mentioned that term, you would miss out on that article, even if it focuses solely on children. So try to avoid the not operator in the context of a review project. The next one is the truncation symbol, which can vary from database to database, but most databases will use the asterisk. This will find the beginning of a word and all the various endings. So adolescent, adolescents plural, adolescents, CE at the end. So you'll find all of those variations through the use of the asterisk. So consider truncating your terms if you can. The quotation marks will help you find exact phrases. So if I'm interested in academic achievement and I want those two words in that order, this will allow me to search for those expressions where those two words appear as is on screen. The parentheses will allow you to group your synonyms together and then allow you to combine them with the and. So here's an example where we have child or adolescent and stress or anxiety. So both sets are done independently and then results are combined together. This one's kind of a nice one to use. It's called a proximity operator, and this one will vary from interface to interface. And so if you're on Ovid databases versus ProQuest databases versus EBSCO databases, the proximity operator is going to be different. In this case, this is an example from an Ovid search where we're using the ADJ operator, and it stands basically for adjacent. So it's going to search for the two words in close proximity of each other. So academic will have to be within 3 words. That's where the number 3 comes in, within 3 words of the word anxiety or the word, sorry, not anxiety, achieve or achievement or success or successes or successful, for instance. And the order is not important. So the words achieve or success can come before academic or vice versa in this case. So the likelihood of you finding more results with this operator than the exact phrase increases. So if for whatever reason, the expression might be, or the article might say, students who have academic and social success, well, we would miss, for instance, that article because there are 2 intervening words between academic and success if we were to have searched that as a phrase. So that just gives you an idea. Sometimes the proximity operator tends to be a bit complex. I hope I did a good job in explaining it, but that's where, again, librarians can come and help sort of better understand how to use that. And maybe our next example will show that. So coming back to another example of a search strategy that was developed for the concept of class size and academic achievement, we can see here that there are a few examples where that proximity comes into play. So just to break this down, what you're seeing on the screen is an adapted search from a published review in 2018. Here there are 2 concepts that are being searched, and we can break those down by looking at the line numbers. So line 1 through 8, that all relates to class size. There's a lot going on the screen. We'll start off by the first 5 lines. We'll notice a difference between those and lines 6, 7, and 8. So the first 5 lines have a slash at the end. This is the code. By the way, this is a search from the ERIC database on the Ovid platform. So this is the search syntax for that particular database on that particular interface. So the first 5 lines have a slash at the end. Those represent subject headings that have been pulled from the ERIC thesaurus. So when you search in a database, you can go into the thesaurus and look at what the subject headings are. So if you search for class size, it also suggested classroom environment, small classes. I'm just skipping a few here, teacher student ratio. And so in this case, these 5 subject headings were deemed relevant and they were included in the search. What you also want to then do is try to use those first lines that tend to be subject heading lines and replicate those as keywords. So lines 6, 7, and 8, those are keyword searches that are done using some of those keywords from the first 5 lines. So we can see that class is adjacent to size. Small is adjacent within 3 words of the word class. There's also the expression teacher-student ratio that was searched as a phrase. You'll see syntax at the end of those lines where it says .ti, AB. That basically tells the database search for these keywords in the title or the abstract fields only. There are other search fields that you can use as well. In most searches for systematic or scoping reviews, review teams tend to search in the title or abstract fields only. Now, all of those lines 1 through 8 are combined in line number 9, and then we'll move on to the second concept in line 10 and 11. And again, we'll see here a subject heading line in line 10 and a keyword line in line 11. Now, there's also something kind of different in line 10. There's the EXP that precedes academic achievement. So EXP is not part of the subject heading. The subject heading is academic achievement. But remember I mentioned that a thesaurus is usually organized as a hierarchy with broader terms and narrower terms. So when I was looking for academic achievement in ERIC, it actually has narrower terms that I found relevant. But instead of searching them one by one, I used a feature in the database for thesauri that allows you to explode. That's where the EXP comes from. So it's not a fancy thing that happens, but it basically means that it's going to use that first term, academic achievement, and search for all the narrower terms that find themselves under it. So that's where the explode comes in. So that's line 10. Line 11, again, a combination here of keywords, academic or school. They have to, one of those 2 words has to be within 3 words of perform or achieve or ability, etc. Line 12 combines lines 10 and 11, and then line 13 takes those 2 combinations, puts them together, gives you that set of results. And then this particular strategy for this review, they decided to limit results from 2010 onward. So they had a 14th line to their search, which was limiting to the years. So that gives you, in a nutshell, sort of an overview of what a search strategy could look like in the context of a review project. So having said that, and I know that's a lot of information to unpack, that's again where your librarian can come in handy, but here are some tips to sort of remember from that process. You want to try to find a balance between being too specific or being too sensitive. So being too narrow in your search strategy and the likelihood of you missing results, but you don't want to create a search strategy that's way too broad and then you end up with way too many results to have to screen. So it's trying to find that balance, which will allow you to you'll discover that through some testing as you go through the process. Use subject headings, as I just illustrated, alongside keywords to increase the likelihood of you finding more evidence on the topic. You also want to test for relevance. By doing that, you can test not only your validation articles, but have a quick look at the first 25, 30, even up to 50 results to see how many of those are actually relevant. Sometimes you'll realize that a keyword you have actually has way more meanings than you thought, and you might be picking up results that are just way off track. So are there ways that you can introduce a proximity word within that search to narrow things down a little bit more? Are there ways that you can tweak your strategy so that it doesn't bring you too many irrelevant results? We're going to talk a bit more about screening in the next video, but just keep in mind that you're probably going to exclude 90 to 95% of the results you find, but that's pretty normal in the context of running a review project. Again, just keeping that image of casting the net as widely as possible. Finally, if you can, get your search strategy reviewed by someone else. As librarians, we go through the process of having our strategies peer reviewed. Also, once that final review is done, it's been reviewed, you can then translate it to other databases by looking at thesauri in those other databases and making sure that you're using relevant subject headings, because all databases will have a different thesaurus. Nothing's easy, so you'll have to translate those subject headings and also translate the syntax as you move from one interface to the next. If you can, or if you're considering using French language resources in your review, usually the databases are not as sophisticated and they're also not as huge as some of the English language ones. So in that case, you want to maybe try to simplify the searches. Once the searches are done, you run them and you gather the evidence. The next step really is to consider complementary searching. And a lot of teams sort of bypass this step for whatever reason, probably because it takes a bit more time. But there are different things you can take into account as you're running your searches. Once you've done the database searches and identified published literature, you might want to turn to other sources to identify gray literature, such as theses and dissertations, conference proceedings, government information, maybe some white papers or some working papers as well, depending on the research question and the likelihood of finding that type of information. You can also target specific websites. So usually if a topic deals with education, you might want to focus on a professional website and like a professional association website, for instance, and search that to see if they have any documents. You can also do what's called hand searching. So hand searching is kind of an archaic term because we don't literally use our hands to search, but it's the idea of browsing through a journal. And so what you would want to do is identify maybe 2, 3, maybe up to 5 key journals in the discipline. And let's say you're going to go back in the last 5 years and manually look at the table of contents of all the issues that came out for those specific journals, just to make sure that your search strategy didn't miss anything important. You might want to also include the next 2 steps, which are sort of complementary. So looking at the included studies. So this happens after the screening takes place. So once you've done the title abstract screening, once you've done the full text screening, and you have your set of included studies, you might want to consult their bibliographies to see if you, again, missed any results or read any studies or references that the search didn't pull in. And you might also want to use those included studies and run them in either Google Scholar or the Web of Science or other tools to see if other researchers have cited those since their publications. And again, this is sometimes going to lead to studies that might have been missed by the keyword or subject heading searches. And lastly, it's recommended in most methodologies to contact experts. So based on the included studies, you might know some key authors and you might want to reach out to them saying, we're doing a review on this topic. These are the studies we've identified as being included. Can you recommend or do you know of other sources that we might have missed? So again, complementary searching, an important step in the process, something that a lot of teams overlook, but that methodology really recommends should be included. So all in all, there's a lot to digest in terms of what's included in identifying literature for your evidence base as part of your review project. I think it's important to sort of dissect the different steps that we covered today, make sure that you're following the recommendations in the methodologies that have been published on scoping reviews. Also relying on what's already been there. Don't reinvent the wheel. If someone has developed a search strategy that looks robust, why not reuse it, maybe adapt it, add some keywords to it if you find some are missing, turn to some pre-existing filters as well. And along the way, keep track of your process, right? So keep track of the decisions that you make, but also the tools that you've consulted, the search filters that have helped you inform your search strategy. Lastly, what you want to do also is try to be rigorous, exhaustive, and also transparent. So again, that sort of ties into the keeping in track part, where you sort of want to make sure that you're keeping tabs on what you've done. And lastly, remember that we're there to help. So if you have questions, consult your librarian. We'd be more than happy to help you. So thanks for listening in on this second part of this knowledge synthesis series on scoping reviews.